I can put the next presentation on your phone. Second presentation, give the comments, that kind of thing.
Oh, for the program itself.
Thank you, everybody, for coming to technical difficulties. We're going to proceed in just a moment, so please bear with us while we iron out a few bugs. Hello and welcome, everyone. How is everyone today? Great. I am so happy to hear it. We're here today for the second part of our three-part and coming soon five-part, perhaps, series, The Data Deluge, Privacy in a Connected World. To begin, I would like to start by reading a land acknowledgement statement. In honor of the Anishinaabe people, the original peoples and caretakers of this land, we would like to recognize that the University of Wisconsin-Superior inhabits the land of the Ojibwa people. Please take this moment to honor and celebrate ancestral Ojibwa land and the sacred lands of all Indigenous peoples. Thank you. This event, sponsored by the Tommy G. Thompson Central Public Leadership, is a multi-part speaker series discussing the timely issues of data and privacy. Our series, Data Deluge, Privacy in a Connected World, discusses personal data. What does it mean in our connected world? What does it tell us about who we are, who we become? All events in this series are hybrid in-person and live. Please look out for our next speaker, Dr. Alexis Elder, on November 4th, 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. for her talk, Data After Death, Remembrance and Resurrection. I would like to introduce our speaker today, Sarah Lambton, Professor of Law at the CUNY School of Law in Long Island City, New York. She will teach law in reference librarian and researches information law issues. Stepping from open government to personal privacy Cartels, the Stanford University Press. Today, we're speaking to us about academic surveillance in libraries and classrooms. Please welcome Sarah Lambton.
Hello. It is so great to be here, and thank you for hosting this whole series. This is a really cool series, and I think it's really great that you guys are all getting together to address all of these different data issues. So I'm going to be dealing with a little slice of the data puzzle today, and it is about surveillance and big data companies, and how our research platforms and other academic platforms are kind of pivoting towards data analytics. So they're pivoting from traditional teaching or traditional, classroom management towards collecting our data and collecting other people's data and selling data to different types of entities and interests. So I'm going to kind of take you through a history of why this is happening, and then I'm going to go over what its impacts are briefly. So as Stephanie said, I am a professor in New York City at the City University of New York, CUNY. And I study information and data monopolies and how informational monopolists are kind of ingrained in our different academic and other research systems. So I'm a librarian, and I'm also a law professor. So I kind of take this from a legal perspective, because that's the lens I see everything through, just as a caveat. But before I begin, I wanted to kind of place us where we are when we talk about the companies that we use, especially in libraries and as we do research. So the companies I'm going to focus on are research platforms or research vendors. So Elsevier, LexisNexis, together that's RELX, Read Elsevier, LexisNexis. If you didn't know, Elsevier is the same company as Lexis, and they're all the same gigantic corporation. And then another one is Thompson Reuters. So Thompson Reuters supplies other types of information. They supply legal, they are Westlaw. They supply financial databases, and they have their own news entity, right? So they supply us with a lot of different types of information too. And when we think about these companies, I always think of it as, I study these companies, and in a way they're very small and specific, right? I'm studying these information vendors that sell different types of information, but they're gigantic multi-billion-dollar corporations. Like Lexis Law isn't a cute little mom and pop like legal publisher, and neither is Westlaw. Elsevier is not like some sweet science research company. They're all parts of multi-billion-dollar information companies. So RELX is twice as profitable as Google, and RELX and Thompson Reuters make multi-billion dollars a year, and they are they make more of a profit than almost any other industry. So more than banking or broadcasting or financial services, investment management, software, real estate. So these companies are very lucrative, they're very big, and they're very powerful. So I just wanted to frame that before we kind of get into talking about what the problem is. And the problem is that these companies that own kind of our academic research infrastructure, right, that we need to use if we want to be students or we want to be lawyers or we want to be scientists, they're owned by the same companies that also sell personal data to the government, to insurers, to landlords, to employers. They're some of the biggest data information, personal data information dossier sellers in the country as well. So this is happening because of just mass consolidation and like in the information market, right? Our academic vendors like Westlaw or like Elsevier, they're being kind of subsumed into these big corporations. And then these big corporations looking to, kind of maintain their profit margins in a world where publishing is declining, they're all becoming data analytics corporations. And it's not the type of analysis that we think of when we think of academics. So a lot of us deal with academic metrics and numbers all the time, right? We're thinking about like science and academic products that do, impact factors for journals, or, do metrics on, whether a case is, a judge will likely find a certain way in a case. They also do this type of data analytics. So surveillance data analytics, selling dossiers of our data and analytical supplies to like immigrations and customs enforcement, and to hundreds of law enforcement agencies all over the country, the Department of Defense, intelligence agencies. So they also sell financial data products to landlords, social benefit programs, insurance providers, and they sell legal analytics products to law firms and government agencies. So they're building analytics products not just for the academics market. They're building analytics products for all sorts of people who make really big decisions about our lives. So when I talk about data analytics products, what exactly am I talking about? There's a lot of complexity, but if you really want to kind of take a meta view and like step way out, these companies have tons of our personal data from tens of thousands of sources, updated in real time. And they're taking that slurry of personal data that they're getting from all sorts of public records, private records, social media, and they're running that informational content through analytics software. And I think of it as like, those Play-Doh extruders where you have the Play-Doh and you like squish it through and it makes a new shape. That's what they're doing with our personal data. They're making all sorts of new shapes, right? New forms of our data to sell different types of data packages to different types of consumers. So one thing I want to point out is that information and data are different. I tend to use the words interchangeably, but I wanted to kind of differentiate them because, well, you'll see in the next slide, but because they're treated different by these companies, and they are different things. So when we talk about data, we're talking about unprocessed points of information. So like your address, your last name, your first name, your age, but it's kind of scattered around, right? Like this dog over here is the data dog, right? Just some numbers, some shapes, some colors, just like random bits of information kind of floating around. Information is structured data. So it's taking data like this and making some sense of it, right? Making it mean something. So instead of like my first name, the numeric part of my address, my last name, you know, my area code, taking it on and putting my full name, you know, like Professor Sarah Lambton works at CUNY School of Law, 2 Court Square, rather than saying like 2 Court Lambton, right? So that's information structuring data. And this is a really hard slide to see, so I'm sorry for that. But what these companies are doing and how they're making money now that kind of traditional publishing is not as lucrative, is they're taking raw data assets. So this is just that those numbers and, you know, little factoids about us. They're structuring it first into smart data, but then they're creating predictive analysis, analytics, and prescriptive analytics. So they're making algorithms and machine learning systems and other types of software and technology that will sell predictions and prescriptions to different types of entities. Are you a risk to have as an employee? Are you more or less likely to commit fraud? Are you more or less likely to commit a crime? Right? So they're figuring out how to make our data into something more valuable, right? That they can sell for more money. And that's a new type of product that is theirs. So this, by the way, is from Clarivate. This is from Clarivate's annual report. Clarivate is a data metrics company that is actually on its way to acquiring ProQuest, which is, if any of you work in libraries, it's our main library management services platform that almost every library and museum and cultural institution in the United States uses to organize its entire library system. So this is the kind of data analytics that we're getting into. How did we get here? So in the 90s, we figured out how to take things that were, you know, different types of data, writing, images, photographs, paintings, movies, sounds, songs, and we figured out how to put them all into a digital form, right? We put them all into a form that could all be stored on the same server, on the same hard drive together, right? So like you can put, you know, the whole Lord of the Rings trilogy right by Rihanna's latest album, right by, you know, your favorite movie, all on the same USB drive or all, you know, on your same computer or whatever. So that is a huge innovation that really changes the way that these companies can sell things, and it changes what they can sell, right? Because it's much easier to sell all this digital stuff and to mash it together and to put it into new forms. So that was one thing that happened. And then as this was happening, the internet was developing and like Wi-Fi was developing, right? That this data, all of this stuff that suddenly had become much easier to consolidate and move around was also becoming easier to send, to share with people, right? I can now go into a place where there's Wi-Fi and I can turn on my computer and I can send something to you, right? That's magic, right? So that started happening also. And when all of this stuff started happening, when digitization and like internet services started becoming more prevalent, the government wanted to make way for new innovation. So they took away a lot of regulations. They like deregulated the communications industry so that it would be possible for like Sirius XM radio to do satellite radio across the whole country, or for, you know, HBO to broadcast in more than one area. And it did, you know, allow for kind of new digital innovations, but it also broke down a lot of safety rails that prevented kind of informational monopolies from happening. So we deregulated our phones, our cable TV, our radio systems, because it used to be that there had to be local public broadcasting across the country. You know, it used to be that there had to be like public access television that you could get on your television. And that kind of all dwindled, right? We also privatized a lot of our public access information. So public radio and public television still exist, but they're not as well funded, right? There's not as much structural support there for those things. And we privatized, television access when we made it digital. It's hard now to find a TV with like antenna that, for free, you can kind of move the antenna around until you find a wavelength. You can't do that as easily anymore, right? We all use digital systems. So we've kind of walled off a lot of free information access. And that's how we got to where we are in today's informational wonderland, right? So when all of that deregulation happened, I like to say frenzy content acquisition ensued. So everything was deregulated, and suddenly all these companies could just buy whatever they wanted. They could do, like, they took the wheels off, right? They could just do whatever they wanted. It was a wild and crazy time. So information and data providers like RELX and Thompson Reuters were super excited. They're like, oh my gosh, we can get so much information now. It's all digital, and there's no stopping us from doing whatever we want. And they just started getting as much companies, as much content as they could. So here's a list of Reed Elsevier LexisNexis acquisitions from 1993 to 2018. So there was a lot of consolidation and acquisition going on during that time. RELX was getting bigger and bigger and bigger and adding more and more stuff into its umbrella, right? And most of the things that it bought, so this is like a close-up of part of this list. And I color-coded what kind of acquisitions these were to point out that most of these acquisitions don't have anything to do with academia. They all have to do with personal data brokering. So this is the one Elsevier product that they purchased from 2013 to 2020. The rest, all of the ones with stars next to them, are personal data analytics products. And these are, the green ones are legal information products. So there was a lot of personal data analytics product purchasing, right, that happened. And at the same time, between 2008 and 2018, Thompson Reuters acquired over 200 companies. What? So they got gigantic, and they just got bigger and bigger and bigger too. And they acquired all sorts of different types of companies, kind of like RELX did. So this is what RELX's sales model looks like today, right? So Reed Elsevier LexisNexis, our scientific journal seller, our legal information seller, 34% of this is their risk products, which is their personal data analytics products. So this green part, which is like our personal data and slicing and dicing our personal data, is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the other parts are getting smaller as we continue. And they say that they are pretty open at RELX. RELX says that they are no longer a publishing company. They say they have a heritage in publishing, but they've managed down their print sales from half of what they do to just 10% of what they do. And now they do most of their work is digital, which, makes sense. We're in a more digital place. But also they spend $1.3 billion on technology and employ 7,000 technologists to build like machine learning and other types of data analytics software, right? And they recategorize themselves from being a media group or a publisher to being a business services company that sells risk solutions. So they're changing what they do. These companies that we've used for decades, as students, as scholars, as librarians, as academics, their business models are changing. They're not what they used to be. So I call what these companies are doing informational Costcoization. They're taking advantage of the fact that data can now be like bought and stored and all on the same data servers. And they're just like buying vats of data and storing them, right? They're data warehouses that just kind of try to buy as much data as they can, whether it's legal information data or academic data or our personal data. And they're like storing it on their shelves, just massive amounts of data so that they can find ways to make money off of it, right? They can find different ways to crunch all of this information and make new types of predictive and prescriptive data to sell to people. And this brings me to my research. So I'm working on a book right now that I'm calling Data Cartels, because I think that this data Costcoization, like all this warehousing of data and all of these different information areas, is problematic. I think it's bad that just a few companies are an oligopoly in academic research, a duopoly in legal research, right? Lexis and Westlaw are the main gigs in town. Bloomberg and Refinitiv, which until very recently was owned by Thomson Reuters. They're the two financial companies where you can get all of your financial data. The two biggest government data brokers are Relics and Thomson Reuters, so another duopoly that's identical to this duopoly. And then they have their news services. Relics has a huge news archive, and Thomson Reuters has its own news agency, right? So I think that this is a problem. I think it's dangerous for information access. I think it's dangerous for privacy because all these companies are also selling our personal data and collecting it. And I think it's just it's bad from a research perspective. It's really limiting now these two companies are like our big box information companies. They have all of our legal knowledge and all of our scientific knowledge, right? And to me, that's not ideal. I don't know. So because we're like in an academic institution, I always like to share this. This is actually from I did not make this. This is from Alejandro Posada and George Chen of the University of Toronto, Scarborough. They did a case study of Elsevier, and what they wrote in their paper that I love this paper. I think it's really informative. The illustrations are really great. Recommend. But initially, like when we think of Elsevier, when we think of, SSRN or whatever, we think of them as kind of these independent little thing. Like Elsevier, oh yeah, academic journals, science, that's great. SSRN, preprints and sharing knowledge that hasn't been peer reviewed yet. That's great, right? But when you look at it from like a market and economic perspective, what you see is that these companies like Elsevier, this is what they used to do, right? They used to take on a traditional publishing role where they would take, they own journals. So as people would write journal articles, they would summarize their finished research product, and then that would get peer reviewed and edited, and then it would be published. And this is where they made their money. This is what they did. But now they found a way to monetize and make money off of the whole research evaluation process, right? They now make money collecting preprint data, connecting authors' data to different partnerships and papers to sell money or to sell metrics to grant funders, predicting what types of research and what researchers are the most profitable, will be the most lucrative, right? So they have found ways to collect and make our pre-research process their product. And they've also found ways to make research process evaluation, like grant funding and archiving research, also part of their kind of financial gain, right? So here's the actual, this one talks about what the companies do. Here's what the actual companies are. And you probably recognize if you're a student or you've been a student before, you recognize a lot of these. There's Science Direct, there's Mendeley, B Press, SSRN, Plum Analytics, Scopus, right? We've all used one of these services, if not all of them. They are all owned by just a few companies, Elsevier being one of them, and they profit off of the whole research experience. They profit. If you're a researcher, they're making money off of you, right? So it's pretty clear that we've expanded beyond traditional publishing, right? Publishers had a choice. Will we stick with, kind of our altruistic, well, I don't know, that was a strong word, with our narrower research, our publishing role, or will we turn towards data analytics? And they're all veering off that information highway and going down a new path, right? So this is Elsevier's own illustration of what it does now that it's kind of encompassed so much more than just traditional publishing. So what the company says that it does, it transforms information to analytics by gathering primary research, public records, so that's our public records, proprietary data, news articles, contributory databases, unstructured records, and structured records. And then it does this magical thing where there's like a circle. What it's doing is it's running all of this information through software, right? Through data analytics software to make new informational products to sell. So you can see how it's taking all of its vats of information off of its warehouse shelves, squishing them all together, processing them, and making new types of data to sell, right? And they're selling it to healthcare companies, landlords, police, whoever will buy it. So you can see one thing I like to show, this shape of it even looks like an extruder, right? It's the same shape. So it's not even like this is so far-fetched. This is literally, well, not literally, but very similar to that. So example of what some of the products that you may not be so familiar with Elsevier being involved in or Lexis being involved in. It's its risk line of products. So LexisNexis risk products are its data analytics products, and it sells public records data. It links, so we all have a Lex ID. I think I'm going to show you that next. Let me make sure. Yep, slides. I'll talk more about what a Lex ID is, but just know that you have one, and it's your data dossier. It's information, a ton of information about you. So they link yours to other people's and to institutions and different things to connect us all, like in a web of information. Information alerts and notifications about our profile information. So they update our stuff in real time and send those updates to people who pay for them. They can identify us. They can visualize and map us in relation. And they can share information. So I know that RELX has a program with like over 1,300 law enforcement agencies where it just connects all of their data together. Like they can all just pool data between each other and then use that data. So that's fun. I always say that risk solutions products, so these types of services, are the creepiest data analytics products. There are other data analytics companies that you've probably heard of, like Axiom, Experian. Some of those companies, if you go online and you're looking for someone, like an old friend who you haven't seen in a few years, and you Google them up, and you can like get one of those records, that's also a data broker, right? They're selling you people's data. But usually that data is sold to commercial entities, right? It's sold to help target ads at you or to, you know, decide what kind of things people in your demographic like, and then to sell those things to other people who are similar to you. But these risk solution products are for that Relics and Thompson Reuters make are generally government research solutions and like insurance company and healthcare. So really big decision makers. They're not just trying to sell you shoes. They're trying to decide if you can get a job or not, or decide if you are a criminal or not, or decide if you should be deported or not, right? So these analytics, these risk products are being used to make some pretty big decisions about our lives that really implicate our civil liberties and rights. So along with being creepy in what they do and what their purpose is, they're also creepily robust. So RELX has 283 million active Lex IDs. That is, I think, like 2/3 of the country or something. All of us have a profile with them, like you know, imagine a virtual folder just filled of data, with data updated in real time, right? So they have over 1.5 million bankruptcy records, 77 million business contact records, 330 million unique cell phone numbers, and just a whole lot of information that's always being updated, right? They use it to reconstruct people's job history, to find cell phone data, to identify who your relatives, associates, and neighbors are. So again, to connect you all. So that's pretty robust. That's pretty powerful. Another librarian in Colorado, Shay Swager, who also does work like this, he actually managed to get his data dossier from Thompson Reuters, and it was 41 pages long. It contained errors, so errors about where he lived. You know, maybe he didn't write something clearly on a form once, and the numbers were off, or you know, there was some. You know how easy it is to look at your history recorded by somewhere else and find errors in it. So there were errors in his records, in his 41 pages of records that are in his dossier. And then Thomson Reuters sent him also a disclaimer that said, it is entirely possible that a record may relate to another individual, and also that there might be inaccuracies in your information. So they kind of waive their responsibility to even provide correct information to insurers and police and landlords. And if you like, there's a whole variety of stories about how these incorrect data dossiers have prevented people from getting a job, prevented people from getting medicine that they need. So it's pretty, these errors, when given to certain, you know, decision makers, can be really, really harmful. So I always like to point out that we didn't just, hold on. We didn't just hand over our collections, our library collections and our legal information collections, our casebook, or, you know, our case reporters, whatever. We also now give these companies all of our data, right? So the reason I started doing this work is because I learned that Relics and Thompson Reuters were selling our personal data to ICE, the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But I always like to point out that it turns out that ICE is only one government customer among thousands. So it's not just ICE we should be concerned about. The defense community and Homeland Security agencies have contracts with Relics. Civilian agencies, so agencies that decide things about intervention, so like student loans, things like that, they might have contracts. State and local agencies, so not just federal government, but also state police, local agencies, and the private sector, so insurance companies, landlords, etc. 70% of local government and almost 80% of federal agencies use LexisNexis special services. So this is not, don't mistake this for like their research products or Elsevier. These are their data brokering products, right? Their data analytics products. So a lot of different agencies are using these products besides just ICE. So here's one example. A landlord was using eviction records sourced from LexisNexis Risk Solutions, a massive data analytics company that compiles and maintains files on consumers. And people were denied housing because of mistaken files, right? So that's a problem. Here is a place where LexisNexis Risk Solutions works with healthcare systems. And at the same time that that's happening, people are being turned away because healthcare systems are using drug addiction risk algorithms to handle the opioid crisis. But if you slide erroneous data through there, people are going to be falsely identified as suffering from opioid addictions. You're leaving these huge healthcare decisions to a machine and to some crappy data. So that's another place where it's problematic that's beyond ICE. And I wanted to point out, a lot of people, when we kind of get to this point in the talk, are like, well, but everybody has our data. Like, this isn't a big deal. I don't understand why what this company does is so problematic. So I wanted to point out how these gigantic data dossiers are different than Facebook or Clearview AI or Palantir, you know, all the other tech companies. So first of all, these companies' data dossiers are huge. They dwarf Facebook's. They come from 10,000 different sources and 78 billion different records, all updated in real time. Facebook data comes from Facebook and from you logging onto Facebook and clicking around and from your friends doing that. That's not good, right? That's a lot of data, but it's not nearly as much data as this. And when you get around to like companies like Clearview AI that does, you know, facial recognition data, or Ventel that does license plate readings, Thompson Reuters and Relics do data dossiers that feed and kind of make these types of data useful, right? Your face or your license plate alone are not very useful. Like, just knowing what my face looks like is pretty meaningless if you don't know anything else about me. Knowing my license plate number doesn't matter if you don't know where I'm going or who I am or what I'm doing, right? So when the government or anyone uses Clearview AI, they need more data to match up that face print data with, to match up that license plate data with. So Relics and Thompson Reuters are data partners to these. They make these products work, right? They enrich these singular data sets with tons more data from all sorts of different places, so you can draw connections, right? That's why when I signed a contract with a license plate reader database, a database that records license plates at different locations, that product was partnered with Thompson Reuters Special Services data product, right? Because alone, the license plate reader isn't nearly as useful. LexisNexis also paired with a DNA company to do law enforcement work. So the DNA data, interesting, but not nearly as interesting as it is when it's paired with your data dossier, right? So that's the kind of stuff that Thompson Reuters and Relics do. Companies like Facebook, like I said, have one source. Thompson Reuters and Elsevier, they all have social media data rolled up into their product. So when you use Thompson Reuters and Relics, your data is flowing into that data and being sold in a package. It's just one slice of the whole data dossier that Thompson Reuters and Relics have for all of us. And here that both of their they both have social media products, social media collections. So this is Lexis, this is Thompson Reuters. And then the last type of company is the predictive software company. So people know about Palantir and Palantir's predictive software business, where they do predictive policing, which is very controversial and oftentimes really racist and biased. Those companies are data partners with Relics and Thompson Reuters, because without Thompson Reuters and Relics' data and other people's data, other company data brokers' data, Palantir's algorithm is empty, right? It needs data in order to work. So Palantir actually lists LexisNexis and Thompson Reuters as major data partners, because Palantir depends on these companies, right, for its products to work. So I always kind of refer to Thompson Reuters and Relics as fueling all of these creepy data industries that we hear about, right? They provide all of the data fuel that these companies need to run. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is, what about our research data? So when we are online in this library or in any library at home, doing legal research on Westlaw or Lexis, or doing financial research on one of these platforms, or looking at, at Elsevier articles, are we being tracked? Is our data skipping over to those other data analytics products, right? I think that's kind of a natural question. So this is my image. So the answer is we're not 100% sure, and it varies from product to product. One thing to keep in mind is that when we use Westlaw and Lexis, we have to get on their platform. So it's not just that we are buying their research. We're like also moving around on their systems. They make us go onto their systems, and that's a great way for them to track a ton of data about us, right? We have to access content in the ecosystems that these companies build for us, right? And one thing I like to point out is how similar all of the different products look. Like, you don't think when you're logging on to Lexis or to like an Elsevier platform like LexisNexis Academic, you don't really think about all the other work that Relics is doing, but it becomes clear when you like go on all of their web pages for all of their different product sectors. They're all the same, like it's all the same cover with just different words on it, right? So this is Lexis's academic university product. This is Lexis Advanced for Lawyers. And then this is their policing product. This is their product they sell to ICE and to law enforcement, right? And they all look just the same to consumers. They just sell totally different data bundles. So when we are using this, does our research go to this, right? Or when we're using this, does our research go to that? The companies claim that they don't include like trackers or do sell the data they collect about us on their research products to ICE or to law enforcement, right? They don't mix those two products. They like wall off the data. However, Wolfie Crystal, who does similar work, found last year, that Relics does put Threat Metrics, which is a data collection product, on its Science Direct research platform. So we're not sure exactly what's going on behind the scenes, right? We don't always get to see in unless we're someone like Wolfie who can figure this out. So there is evidence that our data is being collected. Relics claims it's to protect its copyright assets, but once they have this data about our research, they could use it for anything, right? Even if they don't use our data now, they don't expunge our data sets, right? They could use them later for something. Our data is really valuable, so they keep it, right? Like these are gold bars in storage, right? That's our data to them. Maybe they don't use our research data now, but they're not promising that they will never use our research data. And you never know when they'll change their minds. So this is a letter from LexisNexis in 2019 that they wrote to every law teacher in the country, where they promised that they only give 10% of the value of ICE contracts that were reported in the news, like because there were news stories and research that said that they were helping ICE do surveillance. So they said, no, we're not doing that. That's mostly Thompson Reuters, right? Like that's not us. And then just this year, they signed a 16.5 or $16.7 million contract with ICE. So they changed their mind. Like when they actually were able to get a contract for surveillance, they were like, okay, wait, we're going to do this thing that we promised we didn't do because we said it was unethical before. So don't count on them never using our data for anything or being like above board with the way they sell personal data. So that's something to keep in mind. I guess I was going to do this if I have time, but I think I can just go over this really quickly. So the two major problems with all of the things I just talked about was like this metamorphosis from publisher to data broker to like all of our library services that we depend on in academic services for research, is that it creates privacy and access problems, right? It threatens our personal privacy when we're doing research and when we're being students or researchers or teachers. And it also hampers our access to information because, you know, we've all seen it. There are paywalls, they limit and change the flow of how our information, how all the information they own is shared with us. Because remember, they have multiple data monopolies, duopolies, oligopolies. Like they have a lot of informational control. So here are some of the problems. Here are some of the things that they do with that control, right? They leak personal data, or they don't leak it, but they sell it, right? They package and sell personal data that they get. They can block us from having data with paywalls. They can pollute data, right? They make bad data sets and sell those, and those hurt tenants and they hurt people who need healthcare. And they can also divert data to whatever place they want it to go, right? They can control how our data flows and who gets to have it with and the way they do that by algorithms, bouncing certain search results to the top, you know, leading us towards certain types of content on their platforms that they run on their research ecosystems. So the first problem, privacy. So here I talk a little bit about library code of ethics because I think that that's a good starting place. Librarians have really, they're very clued into these values, to privacy and to access issues. It's all part of kind of intellectual freedom, right? This idea that we can research however we want to research, and we can do that privately, and we can seek whatever kind of information we want, because that's key to knowledge, right? And it's key to kind of democracy and freedom, is this idea that our research is private and that we can do our research. We have an access to information is not censored, and our data is not collected as we look at it. So the ALA Code of Ethics explicitly says that library users' right to privacy and confidentiality should be respected, and that we shouldn't advance private vendor interests, right, at the expense of our library users. And states have actually backed this up. 48 states have library privacy laws in place. And the 2 states that don't have like attorney general's opinions that echo kind of that privacy promise. So it's kind of interesting now that we're outsourcing a lot of our information services, how what we once were assured, you know, privacy when we research is now kind of being sidestepped by these private companies who don't have the same obligations as the library itself. But we welcome them into our library by buying their products. Not that we have so much of a choice, because they're monopolists and they have control of all the information, right? The second problem that these companies perpetuate is an access problem. So this is an article written by Carl Malamud. He's a huge open access proponent. He does a lot of really powerful legal work around access to legal information. And he's also done work around access to scientific and academic research, right? So the way he kind of explains it is, you know, who gets to swim in the ocean of knowledge? Shouldn't we all be able to have access to knowledge no matter where we live, no matter who we are, no matter how much money we have, right? We should all be able to swim in this ocean. Students should be able to access materials they need to educate themselves with the full support of institutions, instead of being forced to fend for themselves in the wilds of the internet, which is kind of what's happening now. So access has become a major issue with these companies kind of monopolizing all of our information and putting it behind paywalls, and also making libraries hamstrung by taking up so much of their budget with like these big, deals and kind of contracts that really force libraries to divert a lot of their budget to these gigantic information corporations. So the kind of, it's the withholding of information, the paywalling of information, is kind of a form of financial and economic censorship if you think about it, right? You are prohibited from seeing information unless you provide some sort of economic payment, right? Unless you either pay to get over the paywall, or you pay your institution and you are affiliated with an institution that pays for to get around these paywalls. So they censor information from people who can't afford it. And they also tip the balance again of information rights to themselves and away from all of us. So it makes it harder for all of us to swim in the ocean of knowledge. Yeah, so we ceded our legal information access to the for-profit companies. So if you want these books, then give me your money. And they also have forced us to use their platforms. And ceding informational control to data monopolists means they control things like science and the law, right? If they can control those information flows, they can control how we understand the law and science. So like, I make a lot of memes, but we give our laws to Lexis and Westlaw in exchange for them publishing it. So some states actually just hand over their law publication and like publishing their own laws to Lexis and Westlaw. So they say, okay, it's so much easier just to have Lexis and Westlaw codify these laws for us and publish them. So we're going to do that. They outsource it. The companies organize and codify our laws. They update our laws. They're the ones who provide our laws to the public. And then they sell our version of the law, or they sell their version of the laws back to us. So we're buying our taxpayer-funded legal materials, our laws, the laws themselves, from the corporations, and the corporations have codified the laws however they see fit. So they're like running our legal information and in a way formulating our laws, right? And then they sell these back to us, and then so it's not ideal. So this is I call this the Dr. Hourglass. I don't know if you read. Cory Doctorow is a writer who writes a lot about these issues, and he I don't know if you follow him on Twitter, he writes a lot of really good information. I mean, not information, it's like kind of stories and mini summaries of these informational problems. And he describes kind of all monopolists, not just informational monopolists, as creating kind of an hourglass where the company sits at the pinch point, and in order for anything to cross between, they have to pay a toll to the company, right? So in this monopoly, these data companies collect rents from both sides. So if you are a researcher and you want to get a tenure track job, you have to give your research to the data company for free, right? So Elsevier will publish it in a prestigious journal, and you can get high impact metrics, and you can get a tenure track job, right? Or a grant. So you have to give your intellectual labor to them. And then if you want to read your article, if you want to access that information on the other side, you have to pay the company a toll on that side as well, right? So both the information creators and the information accessors, like the people who want to see the information, all have to give things, all have to pay tolls to the data companies. It's a pretty sweet deal. It goes back to that Chen and Posada image where the companies have managed to monetize and collect profits from the entire research chain, right? They're really good at finding a way to make everybody in the information chain pay them or give them something that helps them get wealthier, right? So if you compare these companies' kind of information monopoly to other types of monopolies, you can see a kind of a different illustration of this. So I don't know how familiar you are with seed. I don't know. My history is in environmental law, so I've studied this problem a lot. But basically, there's one type of corn seed in the United States, and that's because there's a monopoly, a corn seed monopoly, where Monsanto Bayer has made the corn seed that we all that all cornfields are full of, and all cornfields grow, and then that's what we all eat. So farmers don't have choice. If they try to not use the Monsanto seed, they get blacklisted, they get sued. There's a whole movie about it that I don't know. It's a whole thing, but the purchaser, or I mean the laborer or the grower doesn't have a choice. Just like how in academia, if you want to publish in one of the best journals, you have to publish, in one of these companies' journals, right? So you don't have much of a choice if you want to get your tenure track job or whatever, get the prestige. You have to give your stuff to them. And then we don't have a choice as buyers. We have to pay whatever price they set, and we have to eat whatever they say we're going to eat. We have to read whatever it is that they're providing us with, right? So what if the corn is all of our law and all of our science? Where can you access research? So people are advocating, for open systems. I don't know how many of you are super into like the library and academic. Yes, exactly. So one of the reasons that it's really important to advocate for open access, publicly funded information infrastructure is to kind of break this cycle, right? Like to smash the hourglass so that we can all access this stuff without paying the toll. Let's see. So here's just a few of the effects of science paywalls, right? So Sci-Hub is kind of this website where people illegally publish copyrighted journal articles, but there's a lot of risk involved in doing this because the companies are very litigious. There are huge copyright actions. I think Elsevier filed like one of the biggest copyright actions in history, if not the biggest, against the person who created Sci-Hub and Sci-Hub. So then what ends up happening is, because there's no real way to get around this, this is not legal, and people are, there's a lot of punishment placed on this. Researchers don't even read the papers they cite because they can't get them. So this is a quote. We didn't read half of the papers we cite because they are behind a paywall, right? Depending on where you live and depending on what kind of library resources you have, you may be doing research and you may be making research and publishing findings, or you didn't even get to see the literature review research. You didn't even get to see what went into it, right? And on the legal front, it looks like, legal research companies that try to start up and compete are put out of business by oftentimes litigation. So it's not even a situation where the legal research company, like the competitor, in this case it was Ross, it's not even a situation where they necessarily did something that violated a law. It's a situation where they can't afford the litigation fees. So they have to fold because they're so mired in litigation that they can't afford to continue competing and they have to shut down. So that's happened a few times. Most recently, I think this was in 2019 with Thompson Reuters just basically suing Ross, a competing legal research company, out of existence. And here's an interesting, this is also Carl Malamu's work. So the Supreme Court last year said that the Georgia code that is published by LexisNexis cannot be like their primary property. It belongs to everyone, kind of this indication that maybe in the future we will reaffirm that the law, belongs to everyone and it shouldn't be able to be kind of paywalled by a single company. However, then you have the new problem of like what infrastructure, if we don't support public information infrastructure, like where are we going to house that information? Who's going to update the public version of this law? Who's going to codify it, and where are we going to publish it? So it really does come down to supporting public infrastructure and open access again and again. And yeah, that's it. That's kind of the overview. And I'm happy to have a discussion and take questions. In our regular research instruction. Yeah, so I think one of the things that I've started doing is really making it clear, like when I recommend, Elsevier, in my case, a lot of the times it's like Lexis legal research. I explain what the company does. I say, okay, let's take a step back. I want you to know, all of the types of information that this company sells. Because I think one of the problems is these companies keep all of their user bases siloed so that we never think about one another. Like the legal researchers don't think about Elsevier. They don't even know that it's the same company. And then nobody's thinking about that data brokering part. That's especially, like, they use the word risk or special services. I think they use it on purpose to make it sound really vague, because it's not good marketing to say, hey, we're also selling everybody's data to the police. Like, that doesn't sound very cool. So instead they say, oh yeah, we also do risk. We're also doing, we also have a risk business, which doesn't mean much unless you explain it to students and to people. Yeah.
So how do we prevent them from using our information? Either now or what we do against that sort of stuff?
I mean, ideally we'd stop giving it to them, right? We would use free or open access resources, but that's not always an option. So I think that what we need to do is to like make it clear that we find this type of thing abhorrent, right? We don't like it. We condemn it. That's happening right now. Actually, this week, there are law students all over the country that are doing like a whole week of protesting against the ICE data brokering activities that Relics and Thompson Reuters do. And I think that makes a difference, right? It lets the companies know that like, hey, your customers don't like this. Like, consumers aren't into this stuff that you're doing with ICE. It's not a good look for you, right? Because I always tell my students, like, you have to learn how to do research, right? And if every law firm and legal services place in the world uses Westlaw and Lexis, or in the country, you're going to have to learn how to use them. Don't harm yourself. Like, don't make yourself a worse student, in order to, like, it's not going to help you fight them if you don't know how to use their products. But at the same time, if you condemn the product, condemn what you don't like and call out what you don't like, I think that's helpful.
Fabulous. We have another question about the way that happens that we no longer have access to public information through television as well as through some of these other resources that you have. Is that an intentional sort of, as far as you can tell, or did that just occur?
I don't know. Okay, so I'll preface this by saying I'm not super steeped in kind of 1990s digital telecommunications policy, but so I think it's not that it was intentional, but so I believe it was before 1996, there were communications monopolies, right? Like the AT&T had owned the entire market for telephone communication in the country, and people didn't like that, right? They're like, no, we need local control over our phone company. So it was actually broken up, and they were forced to divest into regional Bell systems. Remember, we all had like Southwestern Bell or whatever Bell we had. I was a Southwestern Bell. I don't know. I know there was like Mid-Atlantic Bell. There were Bells. And those were regional systems that were set up specifically to avoid a telecommunications monopoly where one company owned all of our phone lines. And similarly, there were requirements about having local radio stations and local TV stations. Like, there's this horrible story about this train wreck somewhere. It may have been in Lake Michigan. It may have been in Minnesota, where a train got in a crash and leaked toxic fumes into the air that were like, they could sicken people. And I think they did sicken people. And the town realized there was no way to communicate the danger over the public radio or over a radio system, because the entire system was owned by, I think it's called Clearview, but now it's called iHeartRadio, which was located like in Arizona or in a completely different state, and they couldn't reach anyone there. Like, there was no way to penetrate the radio system to put out a public warning about this like horrible local disaster that was unfolding. So there was after that and around that, it was clear that it was really important to have local television, local radio, just a way to communicate with people. And so those systems were protected for a really long time. But then in 1996, when digital radio started becoming more prevalent, and it was kind of clear that we were going in the direction that we're in now. President Clinton passed an amendment to the Telecommunications Act that just really deregulated everything. Like AT&T came back with force, just everything kind of came like more, and it really just pushed away those guarantees that we would have local access to information on a basic level, which I think is part of what got us here. Like a lot of people say that the solution to this problem is rewinding back and putting more of those kind of antitrust guarantees in place that would prevent these types of monopolies and ensure that we had like public infrastructure on a regional level. Like bring back public broadcasting, fund it more, fund it better. Let's do that again. Like let's make a public news platform online, and let's fund it really well so it can be really robust.
What can students do now to help them navigate this new landscape of resources that are behind paywalls and that are only available through the library? What are your tips for students?
Oh, that's tough. I mean, sharing resources with each other as much as possible. Like I know that in the past there have been kind of these systems on like Twitter and other social media where if you needed an article, you could like use a particular hashtag and like just put out the citation, and somebody who had it, maybe the author would send it to you. One thing about libraries that's really cool is if you support and visit and use your library, they can do interlibrary loan and they can get you materials that otherwise you wouldn't have access to. And that's really important. And I think that's also something we have to hold on to really tightly and protect, because I think that's also in danger. I think like ProQuest and some of these platform systems would love to take over ILL services and make it so that the publisher directly through ProQuest or through, some other platform gives you the article and you pay some sort of fee. And like they want to get rid of ILL because ILL gives away their stuff for free, right? But as students and as researchers, right now you can go to your library and you can say, hey, can we borrow this from a different library? And you can get that information that you need, which is really important, critical. Like so for my research, I wasn't, with COVID, I wasn't able to use interlibrary loan. It was so expensive, right? Because all of a sudden I had to just buy everything. I couldn't go to my library and check out a book, and I couldn't go to my library and ask them if they could get a journal from somewhere else for me to borrow. And that's tough.
How do you see different publishers such as Elsevier, who have now created open access repositories and open access publishing, contributing to the open access movement?
Oh, people have different views on that. Some of them are more, I have one of the less generous views on that. At the end of the day, Elsevier and all the other, Elsevier, Springer, what have you, they all have to make money, right? So they're not going to make a system where suddenly they are allowing us to have open access without us first paying a toll, right? They're the fuzzy guys, the hourglass. We have to pay for that. And they just find other new creative ways to make us pay, right? Now the author pays for open access. Now the institution pays to to host its own journals, but they have to pay us for the copyright. Like there's all these different schemes. But none of them are schemes that don't involve these companies getting a big cut, right? So I'm not sure. I don't think these companies can be a partner to open access because they are for-profit institutions. And ultimately the acquisition and sharing of knowledge is a nonprofit, it's a nonprofit enterprise.
So with regards to open educational resources and the ability to share them and to also put them into different places, repositories, do you foresee any issues in the future as more and more people and things like Merlot start to kind of muddy the waters with those particular terms, open educational roles?
Yeah, I think we have to watch for that as well. I think that they're under kind of the same existential threats that ILL and that other open types of resources are. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about us being well resourced enough to make our own infrastructure that doesn't rely on these gigantic corporations. And I think as long as these gigantic corporations are involved, we are going to hit places where we cannot afford things and where they are squeezing access and squeezing privacy for profit.
So what steps can we take to kind of protest what's going on? Are we powerless?
I don't know. I mean, I will say that when students and immigration groups protest about the ICE work, the companies respond. It's not always like, it's not kind, it's not like fun, but they do notice, and it does bother them. I know at my school, after I started researching this and told my students about it, the metrics, the use metrics for LexisNexis declined at my school. And LexisNexis was contacting me a lot because they were really concerned about the declining number of users at my school. So they care about stuff like that. They're watching it.
With regards to data brokering and seeking out grant funding opportunities, are there things that researchers need to be aware of as they do searches, or should it impact their research habits at all? What can we say about that?
I mean, first and foremost, you need to do you, right? You are students, you are researchers, you're doing valuable work, and you need to protect your work in your space. You need to be able to make an income doing that, right? So first of all, like first and foremost, don't hurt yourself, because it will never hurt them as badly as it's hurting you, right? So do what you need to do to support yourself, but be aware of what you're doing, and be aware of like the way that companies like Clarivate and Elsevier Scopus are kind of collecting data about us and using those metrics. Because the more you know about how that's working and how that's feeding into grant funding, the more, the more just educated it'll be about that, and you'll have more power to interact with the systems.
And for those who rely on alt metrics and plum research metrics to demonstrate their viability for tenure and for promotion, what advice would you have for somebody for an alternative?
Right. I mean, that's the thing. You get yours first, right? Get your tenure. Don't not get your tenure because you're mad at Elsevier, right? That's your tenure and you deserve it, and go after it. But at the same time, you can try to, once you have the power, once you have your tenure or have your tenure track job, go to your institution and say, hey, listen, I know you use this. It's not the best. Do you think we could rethink using this? Because another problem with academia is that we're so bound up in our own kind of made up elitism and hierarchy that's not nearly as important as we've made it. If we can convince our institutions to not rely on these metrics so heavily, I think it would improve a lot of things in education, right? I think it would improve diversity and improve opportunity. And the school could maybe divert all the money it spends on these metrics programs to more services for teachers and students, right? Make the school better instead of just buying all these data analytics products. So once you're in the school, then you have the power.
Like with all the vendors always like buying and selling each other, like how like keeping control and like stay ahead.
You cannot. Yeah, no, that's such a good. I'll have you know, I have been doing nothing but researching ProQuest Clarivate for like the last 2 weeks. So when you mentioned ProQuest Clarivate to me, I'm like, woo, it unlocks like a whole other dimension in my head. Yeah, so it's really, really hard. Everybody's consolidating and also spinning off so quickly. Like in my book, I have to go revise a whole chapter because a company that belonged to Thompson Reuters now does not, right? And it just in like the time it took me to draft this whole manuscript. So it happens fast and it happens a lot. This consolidation is like, that's what happens when you're completely unregulated and just allowed to like play fast and wild. So the main thing you can do is when you see it, if you don't notice it happening, okay, don't be too hard on yourself. No one person can be expected to keep up with all of these market changes. But communicate with each other when you do see it happening. Like one thing about the ProQuest Clarivate thing is I think for a few weeks, we all just kind of were like, well, that's weird, but we like didn't talk about it so much. And now we're starting to talk about it. And we could have, if we had talked about it, you know, if we had kind of sounded the alarm sooner, we all could have had more time to kind of strategize. But you can always, if you see something happening like that you think is a creepy monopolizing thing, like, oh crap, Clarivate's going to take over all of our libraries, you can always write the Federal Trade Commission or the Department of Justice, who run our antitrust, you know, work. You can write them a letter. There's like a whole hotline on the FTC's webpage. You can send them an email and say, hey, I'm really concerned about this. This seems like it might be bad. And you can kind of reach out that way. You can also reach out to organizations that do this sort of work, like Spark, if your library is a member. So there are certain organizations that are dedicated to open access and that are really keeping their eyes out on this stuff. So you can always write to them and say, hey, what's going on with this? Is there anything I can do? And they might say, yeah, write a paragraph to this, you know, this agency in the government or whatever, you know, tell your local official. There are different things you can do without taking up too much of your life.
What would you say to someone who thinks that the homogeneity of data is not a problem?
Like the homogeneity of
I see sources of data.
right. I mean, I think it's like anything. When there's less variety and less access points, there's less choice. Everything's duller, right? And I think that's really important when it comes to knowledge. If you're only getting it from Elsevier, Elsevier sure has a lot of control on how we understand the world, right? They will have control over how we see climate change and how we cure diseases, right? And what we think is really is a really pressing, you know, social problem. Like that gives one entity a huge amount of control. So having a lot of data sources is really valuable. Like one place we want to have a really rich array of stuff is in the data world, right? And also because it's connected to kind of that elitism in academia, right? Like if the only research results you're getting are from like the top 5 science journals, and those top 5 science journals mainly take the published articles from people working at Harvard and Oxford and a few other institutions, you're missing out on like most research that's going on in the country. And you're really getting just a really kind of thin elitist top layer, which is that's not a great way to structure our research world.
This also brings up issues of the format in which information is stored. Can you talk a little bit about that as it relates to these information brokers? Is there kind of a homogenization of the format as well? So for example, looking at blogs being excluded sometimes, various other things. I don't see many memes in there either. So.
I always wish there were more memes. Unless you're making like really mean memes, I don't want to see those. But as far as, so I think that's really important to point out too, right? You're missing out on a whole bodies of content, and by artificially like leaning into one type of content, you could be missing a whole other world of information that needs to also be included. Like, let's say, you know, Read Elsevier LexisNexis's social media tracking product can only use Facebook data, then you're missing all sorts of other social media data, but you're assuming it's in there because it's called a social media data product, right? So it's really important to know what's in your data sets and that they aren't homogenous, right? That they are varied.
What, if any, relationship is there between some of these databases and social media platforms? For instance, I can see that you can share items from certain databases to Facebook and Twitter.
I wonder, I guess I would imagine that's to encourage more paywalled clicks. So they want as many people to click on an article and pay the paywall, right? Or whatever, do whatever it is so that they can get their cha-ching at the end of that. So one phenomenon that people like Samuel Moore, who's a researcher in, I want to say England, researched is kind of how the companies, it's kind of like Amazon, the companies do personalization. Like, okay, if you get a password for Elsevier's webpage and you use that password to sign in, you can store your own, you can make a folder for yourself and you'll get more like this option because we're going to run your data through data analytics. But that's also a way to collect more data from us, more particular data from us attached to our name. So that's something to be aware of. Like these things that they have, like put on social media or click save for later in your own account. That's all also ways to track you and to get more of your data to use.
What recourse do people who have identified false information in their Lex file have to correct that?
None, unless you live in Europe or California, where the data privacy laws allow you to A, see what's in your files. You can demand to know what's in your files. And B, you can ask for correction, right? But one of the things to be aware of is that with these big data dossier products, and I imagine that Lexis and Relics aren't dealing, I imagine it's similar for Axiom and the other big data brokers, they won't correct it themselves. They will direct you to the downstream data source. So they'll say, like it was all in that letter from Shay's report that he got. But it's like, they say, okay, we get data from tens of thousands of sources. We aren't in charge of that data, right? Like, don't rely on this data. There might be mistakes. They're not our mistakes. They're the other data brokers' mistakes. So then what you have to do is you have to figure out where that data came from, go back there and get them to fix it. So it's kind of a wild goose chase.
So a question about information literacy and data. How much should we be talking about that whenever we're teaching students these databases? So is it incumbent upon librarians to educate students that, hey, this is what is going to happen if you use this database? Or should we just kind of let it flow?
Let it go. Just have fun with it. No, I think that's important. I teach it when I teach it, like legal research. I think even just like directing people to, like, if you're doing legal research, my work, or like Dorothea's work, and some of the other speakers you're going to have in the series, just having students understand these problems, I think, is important, right? Really, especially if you are the one teaching them to use these products, to say, hey, just know this about your product. This is the product we have to use. We don't have a choice. This is the product. But just be aware of this. Like, don't put anything too sensitive. Think about, before you sign up for an account, think about what that means for your data, right? Maybe use the free sign-in version where you don't give your account information, or not. It depends on, your level of comfort.
Does that sort of self-censoring sort of fundamentally hurt the idea of the academic freedom?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's one of the core problems, especially for librarians who tend to who tend to be the people who teach this. It really hurts intellectual freedom, right? To not feel comfortable doing whatever research you want. It has a chilling effect, right? Which is exactly why we put a strong intellectual freedom ethic into our basic principles. It's because we don't want people to feel unsafe researching, or that they can't use the full array of products.
Any other questions for Sarah?
So, what is something that, because they just had like that act. Is there any movement in the US?
Sorry, whenever I laugh, it's because I'm like, oh, I wish. No, I mean, there have been bills advanced. In fact, there have been bills that have been sponsored that have been practically identical. The problem is that we're not in a place right now in our legislative branch, in our federal government, where stuff is going through especially easy. Like, we're very preoccupied with other things, and we're not necessarily thinking about doing such a comprehensive law and actually getting it through. Although I think it is a bipartisan, like, generally the idea of internet privacy is bipartisan. It has bipartisan support, which is rare and celebrated usually. So the thing I like is I do freedom of information work and data privacy work, and both of those generally have wide bipartisan support. So they're not controversial, right? Like, everyone believes in data privacy. everyone believes in information to government records. But actually getting down to the finer points of the law, we have not been able to get there yet. One thing to note is there's been a lot of movement in, I think, well, definitely in the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and also the Department of Justice. They have been slowly kind of appointing people and hiring people to do work around data privacy. So there is kind of, in lieu of government action, there is kind of some more like a little bit more of an enforcement edge coming through on the executive branch, just a bit. But they can't go too far without a law directing them to do something. So, yeah.
I guess I also have a question about how it came to be that we don't have access to our own laws in our own country except through a paid secondary resource.
Yeah, I think it's 9 states that have outsourced that. And I think it all comes down to kind of a financial problem, right? It's really expensive. You have to hire full-time people to be codifiers to take. So what happens is legislature passes a bill, right? The bill, they vote on it and the governor signs off on it. And oh, wow, the bill's a law now. Somebody has to parse that into the code, right? Somebody has to codify it. They have to say, okay, here's where it goes in the law. We're going to rewrite the law this way. We're going to strike this and put this here. That's a human job, right? That takes work. And a few companies found that it was much easier to have somebody else do that work. And Lexis and Westlaw set up systems. They're like, we'll do it. And it gave them, not only codification, but publication power. And I think that it's affordability, right? It's much cheaper to do that. The states are really comfortable with that arrangement. That's how their system is set up now. And it's been going on for a really long time. So I think that's how the problem came to be. Like, I know in New York State, we don't codify our own laws. Westlaw makes a version and Lexis makes a version. And if you go online to look at our law, the state has some sort of deal with Westlaw where they can like post publicly some limited links to the statutory language online. So yeah, money, infrastructure, right? It's all information infrastructure. We didn't set it up ourselves, and so we paid Westlaw to set it up.
It does seem that there would be an inordinate amount of power involved in being able to actually codify the law. Is that a fair thing to say? The way that they do that, does that impact anything about the law? Or could
Yeah.
Theoretically?
Oh, I think it does for sure. So when I used to work, I was a research analyst at like big law firms, and about like every once in a while, I would be site checking, a brief that was like going to be involved in very critical litigation, right? And I would find a citation. I'd be like, gosh, I cannot find this citation anywhere. What is this? And it would turn out that somebody once had made up a citation or had miscited something, and that site had been recited so many times without being checked that it had just become like made up law, right? And the reason that happens is it ends up being it goes on the Westlaw platform or the Lexis platform, and other lawyers see it and they cut and paste it, and then like stuff that's not the law becomes our law. And they do that with citators. So they have these little symbols at the top of the screen that tell you whether the law is still good law or bad law. Those aren't very accurate. They're not amazing. So sometimes there's whole cases that people never reference because they're like, oh, well, it has a red flag. It's not good law. When that's not the case at all. So yeah, you can tell by my voice raising, I'm very passionate about this. But yeah, I think it gives these companies a lot of power over our laws. And they also get to decide which search results come up first. When lawyers are searching for certain legal issues, they get to control what the lawyer sees. Yeah.
So algorithms are known to be problematic depending on the program used to create them, et cetera, et cetera. Do you see that a lot when you're doing law searches? Do you see things prioritized based on what you would assume is your profile versus maybe a colleague's?
I see. So I think what happens more is that the system is designed by their highest paying users, which is big law firms, which tend to be older men who are white, who are very wealthy. And so their search results teach the systems, right? Their search results train the algorithms, train whatever, technology they're using. And Susan Neville Mart, who's actually another law librarian, she's She's my mentor. I love her very much. But she's done a lot of research about that. And she has empirical research about that kind of algorithmic bias that runs through Westlaw and Lexis and how it tends to be very kind of, it's focused towards, it's geared towards people who already have the power, right? And it just perpetuates kind of those systems of power.
We have time for one more question, if anybody has a question. Okay, I'll take it. So when we're teaching students how to use these particular databases in which there is this bias that comes from the top, from the system being designed for and probably by the people in power, what approach should we take to let them know that your search may not actually get what you need? You need to go further, or you need to use different keywords. What's the best way to impart that information?
So something that I do a lot is I will seek out work by people who I trust and by people who maybe aren't, the people with all of that kind of power who I know will show up in the search results anyway, right? And I seek out their work and what they've cited on the topic, and I kind of go from there. Like I'm writing something about copyright right now, and there's a lot out there on copyright. But I contacted someone whose opinion I really, really trust about this issue. And I'm going to ask them, I'm not just going to rely on the algorithm. I'm going to talk to actual humans, to see so that I can get a little bit more help. But I don't think you need to know humans in order to do that. You can also just find professors' work that you like, or find work in the area that you believe in that resonates with you, and then see who they've cited and what they've cited.
Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you especially to Sarah Lambton for this very enlightening talk. A lot of fun stuff about things that I hadn't even considered. Fun might not be the best word for it, but interesting information nonetheless. I want to thank Sarah Lambton for coming here and being part of this speaker series. The Data Deluge, Privacy in a Connected World will continue November 4th, 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. with Dr. Alexis Elder and her talk on data after death. We want to thank the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership for sponsoring this event, and also our partners who have made sure that we have a YouTube live stream and all the tech equipment that we need to pull this off. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Yeah.